Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video. This is a recent reads for a couple of quite unusual reading experiences. So the first is The Face on the Cutting Room Floor by Cameron McCabe, and the second is He Used Thought as a Wife by Tim Key. So I'm going to start with the Cameron McCabe. So this was published in 1937, a first-time book by somebody called Cameron McCabe, more of which later. And the main character in here is called Cameron McCabe. And Cameron McCabe is a film editor in a British film studio in the late 1930s. And he works closely with another partner called John Robertson. And the title, The Face on the Cutting Room Floor, is sort of film industry jargon for when a character's, usually a minor character, all their scenes end up on the cutting room floor, so in fact they are not in the movie at all. And the plot of this book is that they are working on a film which is basically a sort of love triangle between two women and a man, and the executive producer comes to Cameron McCabe in his cutting room and sort of says he needs one of the women cut out entirely from the film for her face to end up on the cutting room floor, which is a very odd request for one of your main characters in a three-piece, as Cameron McCabe sort of puts to this executive director. He says, well, you're going to have a very different type of movie then. And the editor says, and the producer says, just get it done. That very night, the actress who played that part ends up dead in John Robertson's cutting room. So literally her face is on the cutting room floor, and not just metaphorically. Then we get into the police investigation, really, led by the detective called Smith. There's a whole cast of characters from the film studios, and the executive producer is challenged by McCabe. He says, oh, is it coincidental that the very day that you asked me to cut her out of the movie, she ends up dead? And basically McCabe accuses him of murdering her, and he confesses there and then in front of the detective that indeed it is him. Cue confession number 2, because shortly after that, the actor, the one in the middle of these two women in the film, also ends up dead. And his best friend, who may also be a lover of his, who's male, also confesses to the murder of the actress. So it's all getting a bit sort of convoluted, and that's what the bulk of 200 or 300 page. This is a 300-page book. That's what the 200 pages are. As McCabe is sort of co-opted by Smith, the detective, to help him solve this mystery, and we sort of go through labyrinthine sort of variations on what might have happened. You know, why these two guys confessed to it. They can't both have killed the same woman. And then the guy who's ended up dead, was known to have had an affair with the actress who ended up dead. Now he ends up dead. So how does this all fit together? And as I say, Smith co-opts Cameron McCabe, and gradually, I don't want to talk too much about this because of spoilers, but gradually it sort of narrows on down, and we get to the point where there's a court case with somebody charged with the murder. And that's sort of how that part of the book ends. And at the time I thought, we're slightly going around in circles here for very little nuanced variation of sort of motive and likelihood of who did it. So I was struggling a little bit. But then we get to the epilogue, and again, I can't really talk about this without spoilers, but the epilogue is a postmodernist commentary on the character of McCabe, and an inquisition or a disquisition on the state of detective fiction in the late 1930s, how it's sort of under threat from the film industry, which will sort of change, if not kill, the golden age that was of Dorothy L. Sayers and all these sorts of writers. And one of the things that is brilliantly done is that McCabe, the author, not McCabe, the character, I'm still coming to that, by the way, that he takes a whole load of real-life literary critics from the 30s, such as Cyril Connolly, where they're talking about other detective novels, and reviewing them or whatever. And he sort of cuts and pastes the face on the cutting room floor where they were talking about other books. So it seems like they are talking about this, this book. It's ingenious. It's postmodern. It's sort of, cut up collage in 1937, which brings us to the author, Cameron McCabe. So Cameron McCabe was unknown for the 40 years when this was published as to who Cameron McCabe was. Never published anything else under that name. And it turned out that he was a German author called Ernest Wilhelm Julius Borneman. And Borneman himself is an extraordinary character in real life. So he was a member of the Socialist Youth in Germany and basically had to flee for his life from the Nazis and came over to England. And he learned English very quickly. And he wrote this book at age 19, which, in his second language. And the detail of this book, such as the jazz clubs in Soho and a lot of the idiom and the slang, is extraordinary that he's picked that up so quickly. It's extraordinary that he used all these postmodernist techniques, such as sort of metafiction. In 1937, I asked myself, is this the first metafictional, 20th century novel? And he did this at 19. I'm not, it's worth sort of just checking up his Wikipedia. Not that I've done it because it's in the back of this book, about the extraordinary life this guy lived. He died in 1995. So this was a book that was so completely salvaged and redeemed and taken to another level by its epilogue, which is about 60 pages long, where it suddenly gets postmodern and it's looking at the character of Cameron McCabe, the character in the book. As I say, it uses this technique of cutting and pasting over real sort of critics' work in order to discuss the state of detection fiction and to pontificate on the genre. This was called at the time the detective novel to end detective novels, which it didn't, but you could see why people were saying that. There's a lot of interesting ideas and discussion within the format of this book about, the nature of detective fiction, the nature of fiction versus reality, the nature of what was called documentary, but which we now call memoir, I suppose, documentary writing as against pure out-and-out fiction. So all these balls are juggled in the air and analysed, and it's just an ingenious way, I say, by a 19-year-old writing in his second language, but being so on the moment as to be actually ahead of the curve with some of the techniques that he uses in here. So it's an extraordinary piece of work. I give it 4.5 stars because it is a bit of a slog through all the pontificating about, who did what to who and all that sort of twists and turns of the detective novel. But, it goes on to another level with its postmodern epilogue. And on to He Used Thought as a Wife by Tim Key. Now, Tim Key is a British comedian, but a lot of his act was sort of these sort of daft short poems. He's also a well-known comic actor. He is the sidekick to Alan Partridge in those of you who are familiar with that show. So he's well known, quite well loved. I think he has quite a big fan base. So he has published books before, but he's not what you call a literary author. I mean, most of his previous books, I think, are all these sort of poems and stuff. And this is basically his COVID-plagued diary, with a tweak. I mean, it's not a memoir. It's not done in a straight way. So it's a mixture of short poems and conversations with a regular cast of characters, such as his Amazon delivery guy, obviously his parents, one of his friends who's in New York who he wants to get updates on what it's like over there, and centrally and foremost his designer, who's a real I mean, they're all real people, we imagine, who he constantly dialogues with throughout this book, even on the poems, because she's waiting for him to supply her with stuff. In the first half of the book, you get the sense that he's kidding along, that he has all these intentions of writing, but he isn't writing at all. And also he handwrites everything. He's not working on a computer. So he would have to post them to her. So she's constantly waiting for this stuff to arrive through her letterbox. And the second half of the book, she's sort of deluged by the amount of work that we get the feeling that he's been sending all along. Because I think the success of this is it feels like it's written in real time. And through that, the 12 weeks of the first lockdown, we get a real sense of the week by week subtle shifts, both in the messaging we were given and told how to sort of, cope, what we were and weren't allowed to do, and also the shifts in how we coped and adapted, week to week, where our mental state was, what our attitude and outlook was. And I think this is all brilliantly conveyed by Key here. And that's why I feel it's a great success. I mean, it was Tim Key in this book, and I assume in real life, lives alone. So it's a very different experience for being sort of under lockdown with a family or a partner or whatever. So, he is going slightly mad. But it's also quite surreal in parts, such as, he seems to be smashing up his flat when he sort of throws things in anger, starting with his own mobile phone. And either they sort of wreak damage on the fabric of his flat, sort of becoming stuck and penetrating objects, such as the cornbread that he's trying to teach himself to cook from, not cornbread, banana bread that he's trying to teach himself to cook online and things like that. He's a bachelor with no sort of skills of coping. Being a comedian, he's often on the road, so he's eating at restaurants and stuff. Here, he actually has to live at home in a way he's never really had to live before. And his only companion is a life-size, giant teddy bear who he dresses in different clothes and stuff as part of his sort of going mad. I think it's a really interesting sort of record of that time, really. Obviously, it's as I say, it's not my experience, but I could recognise certain things about it. As I say, I think its real achievement is across the space of 12 weeks. He reflects the minute shifts and changes in tone. A lot of the poems are about the British government's sort of broadcasts during that, the press briefings and talking to us what we were supposed to do, and they're very satirical, and they're quite sort of hostile, really, because a lot of the characters of the cabinet, Boris Johnson and his special advisor Dominic Cummings, I mean, they're worthy of satire. So I'm just going to read you a short section. So this is one of the poems. It's called Cutout. It was Brewster's birthday. Brewster is a mate of his. I bought a life-size cardboard cutout of Jurgen Klopp and ran it down to his house. I had a long discussion with a Rosa en route. It centred around the phrase essential, because at that time we were only supposed to make essential journeys out the house. I'd placed the life-size cardboard cutout of Jurgen Klopp down next to us, and he watched the discussions unfold. The manufacturers of the £39.99 structure sure had chosen a good facial expression for Jurgen Klopp for this kind of situation. He looked amused by the member of the constabulary's take on things. This Rosa quizzing me on my lockdown. Jurgen just stood there taking the sun and chuckling. So I think that's quite a good poem in its own right. Jurgen Klopp is a manager of one of the sort of biggest, most important soccer teams in the UK. And then under there is an exchange between Key and his designer, Amelia Juniper. She says, "This one I don't get so much." Key goes, "Well, that's okay." Juniper goes, "Is Jurgen Klopp a footballer?" Key goes, "Manager, but..." Juniper, "What if people don't like football?" Key, "I've read poetry books where they've gone on about tarns, M." Juniper, "What's tarns?" Key, "Tarns are little lakes." Juniper, "OK." Key, "You think I want to hear about tarns?" Juniper, "So this is some kind of revenge poetry." Key, "What a phrase." Juniper, "Well, is it?" Key, "What an insane phrase." So there you get the poem, the little poem, and then you get the commentary. Not every poem is commented on, but a lot of the conversations, which are written as like little stage scripts, are between Key and Juniper. And it's just a very tender... I mean, they're not lovers, they're in business together, effectively. She designs his book, including this one, because she's credited on the back. And it's just... I just think it's a fantastic portrayal of a relationship of two people far apart, because she's on the Cornish coast. Obviously, they're both isolated and in lockdown. Two artistic people, but with coming at it from different ends. She's the designer, he's the content guy. And just, you know, two different artistic takes, not only on the material he's producing, but on the epidemic, on lockdown itself. I was totally won over by this. I give it 4.5 stars because it's not literary, by which I don't mean the language isn't very good. He's a poet after all. But it's not conventional literature as we know it. This is written by not a literary person. But I don't think that sort of weakens the book anymore. So there you have it. Two very interesting reads, both 4.5 stars. The Face on the Cutting Room Floor by Cameron McCabe, and He Used Thought as a Wife by Tim Key. So till next time, thanks very much.